Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Charlie, and I'm the president of the Berkeley Forum. We are a nonpartisan student organization that hosts free debates, panels, and talks on the UC Berkeley campus. You can check us out on Facebook at that URL that I wrote on the board. Tonight's event is called Breaking Hate, Confronting the New Culture of Extremism, with our guest, Christian Picciolini. Before we get started, out of respect to the speaker, please silence and put away your phones and laptops. And without further ado, I'll introduce the speaker. So, Mr. Picciolini is an award-winning television producer, and public speaker, author, peace advocate, and former violent extremist. His involvement in and exit from the early American white supremacist skinhead movement is chronicled in his memoir, White American Youth. He now leads the Free Radicals Project, a global extremism prevention and disengagement network, and has helped over 300 individuals leave hate behind. This work was spotlighted in his MSNBC documentary series, Breaking Hate, and his new book, Breaking Hate, Confronting the New Culture of Extremism, was released this Tuesday, February 25th, 2020. Oh, and if you have any questions or comments, please save them for the end. There will be a period for that. But without further ado, Mr. Picciolini.
Thank you so much. I first want to say it's an honor to be here. I've actually never been on the Berkeley campus. It's beautiful. And I also want to say that it's a privilege to be here because oftentimes people of color are not getting the same second chances that I got. So I recognize that, and I hope that I can help raise their voices just a little bit. My journey away from violent extremism began 24 years ago. In 1996, I was 23 years old when I left the American white supremacist movement. But I had already spent 8 years from the time I was 14 years old as a member of America's first neo-Nazi skinhead group. But before that, I was a relatively normal kid from a normal family. I really wish I still had that hair. I don't. But my parents are Italian immigrants who came to the U.S. in the mid-60s, and when they came to this country, they were often the victims of prejudice. So racism really was not part of my upbringing. My parents had friends from all over the world, different colors and religions, and I was always exposed to that. So hatred was not something that I learned at home. And in fact, most of the people that I've worked with, vast majority, also do not learn it at home. There may be casual racism, but as far as the extremism and the violence, it's typically something that they learn outside of their family's purview. But when I was 14 years old, I had already spent 14 years of being bullied. I didn't have a close relationship with my parents. I knew they loved me. I always had aunts and uncles around, but my parents, because they were immigrants and are immigrants, they had to work 7 days a week, sometimes 14 hours a day. I didn't really have an intimate relationship with them. I wasn't mature enough, I think, at that age to ask them why they weren't around, and I felt very abandoned by them. So I grew up kind of as a loner, trying to search for a family, essentially. And because I had been kind of marginalized, it was on the fringes where I really learned this ideology. One day at 14 years old, I was standing in an alley. I was smoking a joint, and a man came up to me, and he pulled the joint from my mouth, and he looked me in the eyes, and he said, "That's what the communists and the Jews want you to do, keep you docile." I had never heard of a communist. I didn't think I had met a Jewish person at 14, and I didn't know what the word docile meant, if I'm being honest. But it was also, I felt at that time, the first person who actually ever paid attention to me, who saw me. I didn't feel invisible with him. The next thing he said to me was really important. He asked me what my name was. And I was afraid to tell him because people always kind of made fun of my name. Picciolini sounded like just about anything weenie, so just growing up was kind of torture with that. And I was afraid to tell him, but I did tell him, and when I did, he didn't make fun of me. Instead, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "That's a fine Italian name. You should be proud of that." And having grown up in the Italian part of Chicago, south side of Chicago, to an Italian family who spoke Italian, it was pretty much all I knew was being Italian. I didn't even know how to be American at that age. So I listened, and then he started to tell me that somebody really wanted to destroy that pride that I had. They wanted to take away the fact that I was Italian. Of course, I never experienced that. I never saw any of the things that he claimed, things like black crime rampant being in my neighborhood, that Jews controlled finance systems, and entertainment, and news media. Those were all the things that he told me, all the people that he told me were trying to take away my pride. I never experienced that, I never saw that, but I listened, and he very successfully reeled me in. So overnight, I went from a 14-year-old naive kid to shaving my head, putting on a pair of boots, and suddenly having a mission. But I still was not attracted to the ideology. I was not attracted to the hate. It was very foreign to me. But the reward was that I had a place to belong. I think one of the things that most people don't understand about extremism is it is less about the ideology as it is about the idea of identity, community, and purpose, which is something that every single one of us has searched for in our lives. The idea of who am I, where do I belong, and what am I supposed to do with my life? 14 is kind of a magical age when it comes to radicalization or extremism, because that's the age when young people are starting to break away from their families, from the influence of their parents, the dictatorship of their parents, if you will, and they're starting to develop their own sense of who they are. Well, recruiters also know this, and they know that there are young people searching for these three very important things that every single one of us looks for. And they target people who are having deficits. But we all search for identity, community, and purpose in our lives, and we're not all extremists. So what else was the factor? I call them potholes, but metaphoric potholes. Potholes are the things that occur to us in life, things that we experience, struggles that detour us. And potholes can be anything related to trauma. For me, it was abandonment. I felt abandoned by my parents. And it was such a deep sense of abandonment that it almost felt like I had lost my parents to death. I didn't really know how to deal with that. But potholes can be any sort of trauma, from abuse to poverty to job loss. Even privilege can be a pothole. If privilege keeps us separate from humanity, if it keeps us isolated, and doesn't allow us to experience the cultures of other people, that can be a devastating pothole. My identity, once I joined this movement, became very clear. You can even see we all dressed the same. We wore the same patches on our jacket. We said the same words. We listened to the same music. We all kind of looked the same. So it suddenly became very clear what my identity was. I wasn't an Italian American kid. I became a white warrior. My community, the one that I had searched for because I didn't feel like I had one at home, I didn't have a family, suddenly became my family. This is me on stage in 1992 in Germany, performing with my band, which was the first American white power band to leave the United States and perform overseas. We played a concert to 4,000 people who had traveled from all over Europe. Suddenly, I knew what my brotherhood was, who my family was. And it became very clear to me that this was fulfilling at the time. And as far as purpose, or what am I meant to do, well, it was defined for me. The ideology was very rigid. I needed to hate certain people. I needed to say certain things. I needed to believe certain party lines. And I did. I swallowed them whole. I still, every day I was involved for those 8 years, was very confused about the ideology because it wasn't part of who I was. But over time, it became easier to justify the things that I said and to justify the violence because it seemed as though I was getting a reward from it. within my community, within this family, the more you did that, the more you were respected. And on the outside, I had never experienced that before. So the option for me at that point was to go back to the nothingness that I had felt before that, never knowing any sort of kind of pleasure with a community or an identity or a purpose, or to just go deeper. And I chose to go deeper. When I came back from that trip in Germany, something strange happened. I met a girl and I fell in love. And at 19 years old, we got married. And we had our first son, and at 21, we had our second son. And suddenly it was the first thing that happened to me in my life that challenged that sense of identity, community, and purpose that I had found in the movement. Because I had to ask myself, am I a hate monger or am I a father and a husband? The two could not really coexist in a healthy place. Was my community the one that I'd surrounded myself with to boost my own ego, or was it the one I had physically given life to? And as far as purpose, was it to essentially scorch the earth because I had so much self-hatred for myself that all I knew how to do was project it onto other people? Or was it to provide a happy, healthy, safe place for my family? And I wish I could tell you at that point I made the right decision. I didn't. I made the wrong decision. I was too afraid to challenge myself. The movement had been all I'd known since I was 14, and even though I had something so positive in front of me, I wasn't brave enough to recognize that. Instead, I doubled down. I decided at 20 years old that I was going to open a record shop to sell racist music that I was both making and importing from places like Europe. And in fact, the store, about 75% of my revenue was this racist music. But I also knew that I couldn't go to City Hall and apply for a business license to sell Nazi music. So I decided I was going to sell all kinds of music. I sold punk rock and hip hop and heavy metal. Never expecting anybody would come in to buy that music because everybody knew who I was. Even before the internet, I was very vocal and very loud. And people knew exactly what I was about. And very quickly the store took off. I sold a lot of this music. Since it was before the internet, people were coming from all over the country to buy it. But what I didn't expect was that people would also come in to buy the other music that I was selling, hip hop and punk and metal. And even though they knew who I was, they came into my store. I know now that they didn't come in really to shop, they came in to challenge me. But they chose to challenge me with compassion. And it was the first time in my life that I had meaningful interactions with people of color, with Jewish people, with gay people, with anybody who essentially wasn't a white male. And it confused me even further because over time, I actually found that I had much more in common with these other people than I did with the people I had surrounded myself with. One individual who would come in, he'd come in a lot. He was a black teenager who was always goofing around. He never really bought anything, but he always came in to kind of like look at stuff and look through the magazines and whatnot. And he was always really happy. And one day he came in and he was not. He was very sad, visibly. And it had been several months since he had started coming in. I went up to him and asked him what was wrong. And it was at that point that he told me that his mother had been diagnosed with breast cancer. And suddenly I could relate to that because my own mother had been diagnosed with breast cancer. And I found myself in a very deep, very personal, very intimate conversation with somebody who I in those 8 years, never would have aligned myself with. And I started to realize that these were people I cared for, that I shared things with, that I had completely tried to destroy with my words and with my actions. And I had never even known the victims that I had hurt. I decided to pull the racist music because I was embarrassed to sell it. And frankly, it didn't sit well with me at that time. And because it was 75% of my revenue, unfortunately, I had to close the store because I couldn't sustain it with the other sales. But it gave me an opportunity at that point to distance myself from the movement. I had become a leader within my group at 16, leader within the US and also overseas by the time I was 18. And by the time I was 21, I was completely disgusted with what I had done for 8 years, embarrassed by it. But I still didn't have the courage to tell people off. Instead, I ended up closing my store and using the excuse that I needed to find myself a job and rebuild my family, because by that point my wife and children had left me. My wife was never involved in the movement. In fact, she hated it. And I had failed to prioritize my family over the movement. When I closed the store, that's when I disengaged. I still wasn't brave enough to tell people off, but it was the opportunity that I found to really detach myself from there. And for the next 5 years, I went through a depression that really almost took my life. I was waking up every day wishing that I hadn't. I was treating other people with respect. I moved, tried to make new friends. I was essentially trying to outrun my past. I was treating people better, and I wasn't associating with people from the movement anymore, and certainly not associating with it ideologically, but I still wasn't being honest. And in 1999, I had an opportunity. A new friend that I had at that point came to me and she said, you really need to change your life. You need to do something because I don't want to see you die. I said, okay, well, I'm open to suggestions. She had just started working at a computer company, a very small company called IBM. And she said, well, you should apply there. It's a cool company. And I said, they wouldn't hire me in a million years. By that point, I had gone to 6 high schools. I had been kicked out of all of them, one of them twice. I hadn't gone to college yet. I was covered in tattoos. I was an ex-Nazi. I didn't even own a computer. It was like the most ridiculous thing that she had suggested. But because she was a friend, I humored her, and I said, yeah, I'll go for an interview. It was a really kind of entry-level job, setting up computers when a university or a business would order hundreds of computers. We would go there and set them up. And suddenly, life was looking up. I had something to hope for. I still wanted to be a good father. I never forgot about my children. But I didn't really have anything to propel me forward. There was no hope in my life. And I went there and thinking I wouldn't get offered a job. And they offered me the job. And I was thrilled because my life was going to change. I was thrilled until they told me exactly where I would be going for my first day of work. Because they told me, and they had no idea about my past, I was going back to my old high school, same one I'd been kicked out of twice, to set up their computers for the summer. And I was not thrilled anymore. I was terrified because I knew that somebody was going to recognize me. Even though it had been 8 years since I'd been in high school there, and 5 years since I'd left the movement, I knew that somebody was going to see me. And in fact, in the first 15 minutes I was there, who walked by me but Mr. Johnny Holmes, the black security guard whose life I made hell the whole time I was there. And he didn't recognize me, but I recognized him. And I knew I needed to do something. I knew I couldn't live like that, but I needed to somehow make an effort to try and repair the damage that I had caused. This was the man I had physical confrontations with. I had protested for a white student union and been let out in handcuffs, and it was really made his life hell. So I decided I was going to follow him to the parking lot. I think I chased him. I probably shouldn't have chased him on second thought, but I followed him to the parking lot, and when I saw him getting into his car, I tapped him on the shoulder. And when he recognized me, he took a step back because he was afraid. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. And all I could think at that moment was to say, I'm sorry. And he looked at me and he shook my hand and he accepted my apology, but he also said, I know that makes you feel good, but it doesn't do a whole lot for me. You need to do more. And that's when he really made me understand that I needed to go out into the world and repair the harm that I had caused. That I had to go out and ask for forgiveness. But also that I needed to find a way to eventually forgive myself. He saved my life, really, because I was in a very bad place at that moment. And And like the people in the record store, people that I normally would have hurt, this was a man who I did hurt, who saw in me, I think, what he saw in every student that he had watched over, whether they had become a Nazi or not, was that it really was possible for everybody to somehow be detoured by their potholes. And he encouraged me to really go out there and be uncomfortable and to try and repair the damage that I had caused. And I started to do that. And I started to notice that people, not only did people forgive me, but I also started to feel better about who I was and my place in the world. As I found more ways to try and fix the damage that I had caused, I actually found that it was fixing me. And I'm happy to say that many, many years later, Mr. Holmes is my mentor. We go fishing around here somewhere. Anyway, there's a picture of us together just a few months ago. He just retired from teaching and security. And I've also reconnected with my family. My Italian parents are still crazy. But I never lost touch with my children, which really was also something that saved my life at that point. I was able to find a way to inject good into the world through them at first without even knowing. And then I started going into communities that I had hurt, into the groups, and find the people that I had physically assaulted, verbally assaulted. And I've continued that work now for 24 years. I left in 1996, and I've really never stopped trying to repair that damage. And I know I never will stop, because I know I never will be able to repair all the damage that I caused. Now, the work that I do is helping people disengage from extremist movements, mostly in the white supremacist movement, but I've worked with former ISIS members, I've worked with other types of extremists. And the way that I work with them is not to debate them. I don't tell them they're wrong, even though I know that they are, more than most people. I do a lot of listening, and I listen for potholes. And then I fill them in. And I've helped over 300 people, maybe even closer to 400 by now, disengage from extremist movements. And I do the same thing, essentially, that happened to me. I expose them to the people that they think that they hate. I let them self-reflect to understand their motivations of why they put on that suit of armor of hate to protect themselves from the pain that they were feeling and readily projected that to other people. I just want to leave with one challenge before we take some questions, and it's really something that I hope you do today, but every day, and that is find somebody that you think is undeserving of your compassion and give it to them and watch what happens. It is the most powerful thing that we can do. And because I guarantee you they're the ones who really, even though they probably deserve it the least, could benefit the most from it. So thank you very much. It really is an honor and a privilege to be here. Thank you for coming. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Please don't be shy, and thank you very much.
Thank you for that address. We would now like to invite our moderator for the evening, Jonathan Min, up to the stage.
Thank you, Mr. Picciolini, for coming to speak here today. It's a pleasure to have you before. In a recent Atlantic article, you mentioned that white nationalism has become progressively more mainstream. From your experience, what reasons, if any, do you think explain the recent rise in its acceptance?
Extremism typically flourishes when societies are experiencing a period of uncertainty. It kind of creates a tinderbox of all sorts of extremist behaviors. We are living right now in a period of great uncertainty, from not knowing how we're going to survive tomorrow, how we're going to pay for things, if we're going to find a job, to, from the top down, uncertainty kind of being heaped upon us from politicians and from our leaders. the disappearing middle class. There's so many things happening in our society right now where people are feeling as though they're losing something, and that to them, even though it's incorrect, feels like oppression. They're mistaking it for oppression. So I think that I'm going to place the blame, I think, partly where it belongs, and that is there are people today at the very highest, in the very highest power and seats of power that are mimicking almost identically what I used to say 30 years ago. Policy-wise, rhetoric-wise, injecting fear, the use of certain words to describe people, the way we talk about other countries. Our leaders right now are kind of doing the job of the recruiters when I was 14 years old. It's injecting fear and using that rhetoric and propaganda to make people even more afraid but more uncertain. So I think that right now we're experiencing a time when people don't know what to believe in anymore. And I think that extremists are doing a very, very good job of injecting their propaganda into the mainstream. We have news channels that are almost dedicated to conspiracy theories and propaganda. That didn't exist 30 years ago when I was recruited. You had to get a pamphlet, a book. Somebody had to invite you to a meeting. Nowadays, you can log onto the internet. That's essentially, if you want to find it, a 24-hour all-you-can-eat hate website. There are millions, I think, of young people searching for identity, community, and purpose with plenty of potholes that are being groomed online.
So in the past decade, a slew of extremists have circulated manifestos and these sort of hateful things online. What role, if any, do social media sites like Gab, 4chan, and others have in the movement's rise?
Well, Gab is fairly new. That was kind of a product of people being deplatformed and creating their own safe space. It's very influential because it provides them a safe place to essentially communicate these ideas, right? Same thing with 4chan and 8chan. While they certainly weren't created for that reason, they've become in large part a place where these virtual personalities can engage in whatever they want. So I think that there's a lot of responsibility on the part of social media companies to ensure the safety of their users. I really think of a company like Facebook or Google almost as like a country, right? They have the population with users that are bigger than most countries on Earth. They have GDP that's greater than most countries on Earth, but yet they don't provide social services that countries typically provide. So it's kind of like a wild west frontier where it's an amazing tool and it can be used for good, but unfortunately, because it's so new and we haven't learned how to responsibly use them and they haven't learned how to responsibly govern them, that they are a place where not only extremism grows, but just all sorts of kind of bad social behaviors are being led. So I think that they do have a responsibility to at least understand and start to find ways to make it safe for community members to exist. Because the majority of people online are not hateful people. I think that we see a lot of it.
While the responsibility of these online social media companies often relate to the private sector, some have argued that the best way to counter extremist groups is through government regulation. So, given constitutional constraints, what role, if any, should the government play in regulating extremist movements?
Well, I think that if we want to counter extremism, the best way to do that is to focus on young people from the day that they're born to make sure that they have the best mental health advocacy, best mental health services, healthcare, education, opportunity for jobs, and we need to overhaul the systemic racism that we have in our lending institutions and our criminal justice, because that is breeding racists, and has been doing that for 400 years. So I think that our government has a great I don't want the government to regulate what we say or what we think, but they should be putting in place the things that are building positive society. We have to understand radicalization doesn't start the day that we accept a toxic ideology. Pre-radicalization starts the day we're born. It starts with those potholes that we hit. When we find that ideology, that's just a permission slip to be angry, to direct our anger at a specific group or a specific person. If we want to counter extremism, then what we need to do is make sure that we can repair potholes and teach people how to navigate them and offer them the services to deal with. So I think that the government's role is really to establish a safe kind of roadway, stick into the construction metaphors, is to make sure that they can offer the best paved roadway for us to succeed.
Many of these potholes are hard to fill in the sense that it makes people susceptible to indoctrination. What, if anything, do you see as the larger impacts of such indoctrination in your efforts to address white supremacy?
Explain your question a little bit more. I'm not sure.
Many white supremacists are susceptible to indoctrination at a very young age.
Yeah.
So in your work in advocacy and activism, does that come as a sort of barrier?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's easy to find. So when I work with somebody, and maybe it'll help to explain when I work with people, the first thing I do is I have to build a rapport with people. Then I listen. I never debate them. I tell them that they're wrong, even though I know that they are. I listen for those potholes, and then I fill them in. In some places, it's easy. This is like San Francisco. There are a lot of resources to go to. Paducah, Kentucky, not so easy. Even in terms of cultural differences, some people come from families where it's just not kosher to get mental health support. It's too much of a stigma, which we need to squash that right away, because mental health care is just as important as health care. Yes, I do find it hard in certain places to work with people, in certain parts of the country. But right now in our country, there is no reward for a white nationalist to not be a white nationalist, right? At least readily available rewards. They, in certain cases, they feel like their guy is in the office. In certain ways, they feel like, the laws are favoring them. We're seeing a rise in hate crimes. It is kind of their time right now, so that makes it difficult too. What we really need is a global movement that is much cooler for them than white nationalism, right? To show them that the rewards that they're getting there are superficial. They're only rewards within their small community, but that they're destroying everything else around it, including themselves. So yes, it is difficult, and it's also difficult because of the internet. The internet makes it very, very hard, because they can live two lives. They can live one life online, their virtual persona, which they can do whatever they want, and then maybe they have the real life that they live where they're not connected to anybody, and that makes it very difficult.
Due to white supremacy forming many of these individuals' identities growing up, many of them tend to relapse when trying to escape the movement. What steps, if any, help former extremists adjust in society? People go back if you don't replace their identity, community, and purpose with something positive. They'll go sideways, they'll backslide, and that's always the most difficult thing for me, is to find them a new way to fit in. Sometimes in a world that's hostile and doesn't want them back, necessarily. So they need to be held accountable for every single thing that they've done, every single thing that they've said. I hold myself accountable for 24 years, and I hold everybody I work with equally accountable. But at the same time, unless we're prepared to line them up and murder them, they're not going to go away. We need to find a way to draw them out without necessarily attacking them, if that makes sense. Trust me, there are no happy white supremacists. There are no confident white supremacists or extremists. They are not joy-filled. People who are happy don't cut off somebody's head, drive a car through the crowd. What we really need to do is find a way to empower people before that even becomes an option. There are many of these structural factors which lead to white supremacists committing to the movement. As you mentioned, these individuals often enter these movements because of a lack of identity or purpose. So what other factors, if any, draw people to the white supremacist movement?
I don't know that there is any reward. It's, I think most people who end up going that way are maybe seen for the first time artificially. They feel elevated. There is no reward. There is no end game other than destruction in these movements, and that's their goal. Really, they want to scorch the earth, to carve out their own kind of easy. So what I would say to somebody who falsely believes that there's some sort of a reward there, you're not. You are not only hurting other people, you're hurting yourself, your family,
Would you say, like the 2018 Pittsburgh shooting, where the shooter uploaded a manifesto online, that these individuals who join these movements are doing it for attention?
I think part of it is probably attention. I can tell you from my own experience. I wanted my parents' attention. I think I hated immigrants because my parents were immigrants and I felt that they had abandoned me. So I think so much of what I did was to punish my parents. I think, when we're talking about somebody who walks into a house of worship and murders people, or walks into a store and murders people, part of it is attention, but I think part of it is that they are so broken that they want to project that pain that they're feeling onto other people, and they don't know how else to deal with it.
In regards back to online speech, in the 2017 Unite the White rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, it saw the attendance of many individuals from the online alt-right. What, if at all, do you believe the role of the internet may have in the mobilization of these extremist groups?
Oh, I think it's almost exclusively done online. Everything happens online. Radicalization these days is happening online. Organizing, even communicating attack plans, networking, you name it. So these groups have been forging alliances overseas for decades. So we need to stop thinking about our white supremacy as an American problem. It is a transnational problem. These groups are now, have been for decades, working with each other. Back in my day, it was propaganda through music. Now it's paramilitary training camps, places like Ukraine and Russia. They work together on propaganda, they work together on recruitment. The internet really has kind of changed it.
Given your role in the movement, your work after leaving the white supremacist movement has brought more attention to the groups that you were a part of. How, if at all, do you balance your desire of countering the white supremacist movement with the possibility of giving these supremacists more courage to speak up?
Wow, that's the first time I've heard that. My work is bringing more attention to them. I wouldn't be doing my work if it wasn't for them. I think what I do is I'm really trying to bring an insight to the average person on, one, how dangerous these groups are, two, how easy it is for young people to fall victim to this stuff. But also, I think when I speak about them, it shows how weak they are, too. I hope I'm not bringing that attention. If that's what I'm doing, I will stop doing this job right now. I've been doing this for 24 years, and I can tell you that once people meet a former extremist who are in this movement, if they meet a former extremist, that's the only person they're ever going to get a true insight into the terrible life that they're leading, because they can relate to us. Really hope I'm not bringing positive attention to them. If anything, I hope I'm pulling them.
Unfortunately, for the sake of time, this is going to be my last question before we move on to questions from the audience. You've primarily tackled the issue of overtly racist groups. However, most people hold implicit or unconscious racist attitudes. How, if at all, should activists address these two distinct problems?
Well, I think we need to call out racism and hate anytime we see it. I think we're unfortunately still living in a society where some people don't even think it exists, that hate is a hoax, that racism is a thing of the past. And I can tell you it's not. And anybody who thinks that should speak to a person of color, to ask them if we're truly living in a post-racial society. But I think we need to understand that people who hate, people who are racist, people who are part of these movements are anti-American. They're anti-democracy, and they really want to destroy everything that we have. So it is all of our responsibility to call it out when we see it. But I also think, because I've seen so many people, and sometimes it's the people who think are, they're the worst, who've said the most awful things. Every single person that I've met wishes that they could be those movements. They may not be brave enough, they may not even know it at that point, but there are moments in your time, because it's such a toxic movement, that they want an escape route. So I think we have to at least have that as an option for when we deal with this, because there are people on the lead. But we must also stand up strong. We all have to be anti-fascist. We have to stand up against this, because one, it is destroying our society. Two, it's killing the people that we love, and the people we respect, our neighbors. And we all have a responsibility to stand up to it, just like we would stop somebody from walking into a school and murdering. We have this responsibility. It is existential for us to this.
Well, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for answering my questions. We're going to move on to audience questions now. So if anyone would like to ask Mr. Picciolini something, please raise your hand and I will call on you. Please keep your questions brief, and please remember to speak up. Right there.
You talk a lot about how trauma is what gets people into these groups and is what makes them stay there. That of course creates incentives for these groups to then of course re-traumatize the people who they're like putting on the front line, so to speak. How do we like navigate that without also basically letting them act without impunity? How do we disallow trauma while at the same time holding them accountable?
That's a really good point, and it's very astute too, because extremists are very good at finding the traumatized to pull them in, but also creating the conditions that traumatize us. Right? So they are creating the ecosystem for it to flourish, and that today is happening. That's a really good question. I'm not sure I have the final answer for you, but I can tell you that what I do is I'm cautiously vulnerable with the people that I work with. It's important that they recognize that I'm not perfect. This is maybe just a general statement for adults working with children, for teachers, for coaches, for parents, whatever. We need to learn to be more vulnerable, cautiously vulnerable, right? You just walk up to a Nazi and talk about that. I wouldn't recommend that. Although I have seen that work too. We need to be cautiously vulnerable with people when talking about trauma, so that we're not victimizing them in their trauma. They need to understand we all deal with trauma, right? And we have to be able to share our vulnerabilities with the people I do with the people that I work with, so that they can learn to share it with me. Our children, and my boys are 27 and 25, they're not little anymore, but growing up, after I left the nation, it was very important for me from the age of 5 to talk about my vulnerabilities with them, to tell them I'm not perfect, to admit my mistakes and own up to them, because I never wanted them to be afraid to be able to be vulnerable with me, to tell me what they were doing. So I think we have to, in some cases, learn to see the child and not the monster, knowing that the monster is oftentimes a suit that they wear. I'm not saying that they don't commit horrible acts. I'm not saying they don't say awful things and they shouldn't be accountable for that. But it starts somewhere, and oftentimes it's because they're putting the suit on to protect themselves, but also to scare other people away. So I think the biggest trick is we have to learn to be okay with our vulnerabilities and to be able to share them with people in a safe way. I'm not saying walk up to a white nationalist and start talking about your flaws and your shortcomings and all that stuff, because they will exploit that. But approach it in a way where eventually you can understand that you have to be able to share something with you with them so that they feel comfortable sharing. It's a hard concept of being nice to the bad guys, I get it. But I also know it's the only thing I've ever seen break hate. It feels good to punch Nazis, it might stop them temporarily, but I guarantee you it's not stopping the problem, it's making it worse in some cases. So I think we need to learn to understand the motivations of what drove them there, so we can repair those motivations for future generations. And that really is, we have to stop this at some point. So maybe it means like the ones who are there now, they may be there forever. But at some point we have to stop teaching generations that that's an option. We have to stop creating the conditions that make it an option.
Right there.
Have you any contact in Chicago with the white anti-racist organization uptown in Chicago who organize the group Rising Up Angry? So people should know
organize the group what?
Rising Up Angry. They're a bunch of young, self-described white do-gooders who actually formed an alliance with the Black Panthers and the Women Lords in Chicago.
Oh, so you're talking about the original Rainbow Coalition?
Yeah, the original Rainbow Coalition. And whether or not the people you work with today, whether you've tried to get them involved in political coalitions, with groups of color.
I do work with a lot of anti-racist groups, anti-fascist groups, activists. It's possible. I don't think that that iteration of that group is around anymore. I know that was during the Civil Rights Movement. And then the second iteration of that was kind of Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Coalition. No, but I think that that's an interesting idea, where people can come together and talk about identity and respect everybody else's identity. The answer is yes, I probably work with them. No, I don't know specifically that anybody within that Rainbow Coalition today, but I do work with a lot of activists.
Unfortunately, for the sake of time, this is the end of our questions. Thank you so much for answering my questions. I'd now like to invite our president, Charlie McMurray, up back up on the stage for some closing remarks.
And can I just say, if anybody has any questions, and I know there are probably a lot, maybe sometimes they're uncomfortable to ask, please just email me. My email is real easy. It's just christian@picciolini.com. You can also just Google skinhead Chicago, and you typically come up pretty high on the list. But yes, I'd be happy to answer anything you have. Thank you for asking.
Awesome. Give one more round of applause. So we have a tradition at every single Berkeley Forum event to present our speaker with one of the posters we designed for the event. If you'd like one yourself, become a Berkeley Forum speaker someday. And so this is for you.
Thank you very much.
All right.
I just wanted to say one last thing. I know the things that I talk about are extremely difficult, especially when we're living in a world where people are killing each other. But we have to put a stake in the ground at some point. And it's not about, let's be nice to the good guys or anything like that. It's about how can we really empower future generations, not just in our country, but all over the world, to really grasp and latch on to positive versions of themselves versus trying to find ways to cover up the fact that they feel insecure and that they have to hurt other people like that. But we have to hold people accountable. There are no free passes for anybody, and it's important that we put our foot down and we speak up against this.